When I finally bought the ranch I had dreamed of for years, I built a fence that reflected my spirit, bold, colorful, and unapologetically different. But the local HOA thought otherwise. They sent letters, fines, and ultimatums declaring my fence too gaudy for their strict neighborhood standards. They wanted conformity. Instead of bowing down, I dug deeper. I learned that the only road leading into the HOA community, the one every resident relied on daily, was actually private property. And more importantly, it was for sale. So I bought it. The same HOA that tried to dictate the color of my fence now had to ask permission to drive home. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it to make a point. Freedom, individuality, and property rights matter. If you try to crush someone's creativity under rules, don't be surprised when they push back harder. What began as a fence fight became a lesson in standing tall, turning the tables, and never underestimating the power of owning your story, and sometimes the road itself.
Individuality versus conformity is a theme that resonates in many parts of life, but few scenarios illustrate it as vividly as the clash between Homeowner and an HOA. The fence that sparked the conflict might have seemed like just another decoration to some, but to the homeowner, it was an expression of self. It was a canvas of personality, a way of saying, "This is who I am, and this is how I want to live." That, in essence, is the heart of individuality, the ability to make choices that reflect one's values, tastes, and creativity. Conformity, on the other hand, often arises when institutions or communities set rules that seek uniformity for the sake of order, cohesion, or aesthetics. HOAs, in particular, thrive on conformity, using guidelines to enforce consistency in lawn care, paint colors, or fence styles. Their reasoning often stems from the belief that sameness preserves property values and ensures neighborhood harmony. Yet what often gets lost is the human element, the idea that houses are not just investments, but homes where people live, grow, and express themselves. When individuality clashes with conformity, the outcome often reveals the priorities of a community. The gaudy fence became more than wood and paint. It became a lightning rod for the question of who gets to decide how someone expresses themselves on their own land. In an educational sense, this example provides a case study in governance and personal rights. Conformity can certainly provide benefits, predictability, reduced conflict over taste, and the comfort of sameness. However, it can also suppress creativity, limit freedom, and create resentment. A balance must be struck, but that balance depends on a community's willingness to honor diversity alongside order. For individuals, understanding this tension means recognizing that personal expression will sometimes invite pushback. A bold choice, whether in design, lifestyle, or opinion, will almost always challenge the comfort zones of those invested in conformity. The key lesson here is not to retreat when confronted with opposition, but to evaluate the situation carefully. Ask, is the conformity being demanded essential for safety or fairness, or is it merely about control and aesthetics? Educationally, this requires critical thinking and the ability to analyze motives, rules, and consequences. The homeowner in this story chose to defend individuality, not only by keeping the fence, but by challenging the very structure that sought to silence it. This example also underscores how conformity often disguises itself as practicality. HOAs frequently justify their strict rules by pointing to property values. They argue that if everyone were allowed to decorate freely, chaos would ensue, buyers would turn away, and the community would decline. While there is some truth in protecting shared interests, this argument assumes that uniformity is the only path to stability. Yet countless thriving neighborhoods celebrate diversity in architecture, landscaping, and design, proving that individuality and prosperity are not mutually exclusive. In fact, individuality often becomes the very feature that attracts others to a place. It gives character, soul, and authenticity to an otherwise sterile environment. Educationally, individuality in the face of conformity teaches resilience and creativity. It shows that personal expression is not frivolous, but foundational to identity and autonomy. A colorful fence may seem trivial compared to larger struggles, but it represents the same principle, the right to live according to one's vision, within the bounds of the law, without unnecessary interference. By standing firm against conformity, individuals also encourage others to examine their own situations. How many of us suppress our choices to avoid standing out? How many settle for what is acceptable instead of what is meaningful? The story of the fence challenges us to reflect on those questions and to see conformity for what it is, sometimes helpful, but often a force that quietly erodes authenticity. In the end, individuality versus conformity is not a battle about fences or roads. It is about identity versus uniformity, courage versus compliance, and expression versus suppression. The lesson is clear. Individuality may create tension, but it also creates progress, innovation, and meaning. Conformity may create order, but if left unchecked, it risks creating silence and sameness where there should be diversity and life. The gaudy fence became a reminder that freedom is not always tidy or palatable, but it is always worth defending.
Knowing your rights and options is one of the most empowering lessons any person can learn, especially when facing a situation where authority or a governing body is challenging your choices. In the context of property ownership, this principle becomes even more critical because the land and home you purchase are not only financial investments, but also extensions of your freedom. The story of the fence and the HOA highlights just how important it is to understand the details of property law, contracts, and ownership, because often the leverage we need is hidden in the fine print or in overlooked opportunities. Many people encounter rules, regulations, or restrictions and assume that they are absolute. They pay the fine, accept the order, and comply without question. Yet, in reality, most rules have boundaries, exceptions, and legal contexts that determine whether they can be enforced at all. Knowing your rights means asking the right questions, consulting the right resources, and not being intimidated by an organization's authority. When the HOA declared the fence too gaudy, their decision rested on their bylaws, which are binding documents that members agree to when they purchase property in that community. However, bylaws are not infallible. They must operate within the broader framework of municipal codes, state laws, and property rights. For example, if an HOA rule conflicts with a higher law, that rule may not stand. This is where knowing your options becomes critical. Rather than assuming the HOA's word is final, the homeowner in this story looked for leverage elsewhere and discovered that the very road the HOA depended upon was privately owned and available for purchase. That discovery turned the entire situation on its head. It illustrates that options often exist outside the immediate conflict. If one avenue seems closed, another may open if you know where to look. Educationally, this teaches an important principle about problem solving. Rarely is there only one solution to a conflict. Often, the most effective solution comes from stepping back and analyzing the situation from a broader perspective. In disputes over property, this might mean researching deeds, easements, zoning laws, or ownership records. In personal or professional conflicts, it might mean identifying hidden advantages, overlooked resources, or alternative paths to resolution. Knowing your rights is not just about legal literacy. It is about cultivating the mindset that authority can be questioned and that creative solutions exist. This lesson also demonstrates the value of preparation. Many people only start learning about their rights when they are already under pressure. By that point, it may be harder to act decisively. A stronger approach is to educate oneself beforehand. For homeowners, this means reading contracts carefully, understanding the scope of HOA power, and being aware of property boundaries and legal rights tied to ownership. For others, it may mean becoming familiar with workplace policies, consumer protections, or civil rights. Knowledge does not guarantee immunity from conflict, but it equips you to face it with confidence rather than fear. Another dimension of knowing your options lies in negotiation. Sometimes the mere act of demonstrating that you understand your rights can shift the power balance. Organizations often rely on compliance born of ignorance. When confronted by someone who knows the law, can cite regulations, or presents alternative strategies, they may become more willing to compromise. In the fence story, the purchase of the road was not just an act of defiance. It was also a strategic move that forced the HOA to reconsider its rigid stance. By exercising an option that no one else had thought to explore, the homeowner flipped the narrative from weakness to strength. Ultimately, this key point is not simply about fences, roads, or HOAs. It is about empowerment in the face of authority. It underscores that rules exist within systems, and those systems can be studied, understood, and navigated. Education, persistence, and creativity often reveal options that initially seem invisible. Knowing your rights transforms you from a passive subject of rules into an active participant in shaping outcomes. The broader lesson is clear. The difference between frustration and freedom often lies in how much you know about the systems governing your life, and how willing you are to explore your options beyond the obvious.
Turning setbacks into power moves is a skill that separates those who feel defeated by obstacles from those who find ways to turn challenges into opportunities for growth and influence. At first glance, setbacks appear to be purely negative experiences. They can create frustration, disappointment, or even anger, as they represent roadblocks to goals or personal expression. However, when looked at differently, setbacks can provide the raw material for resilience, creativity, and transformation. The conflict between the homeowner and the HOA illustrates this principle perfectly. Being told that the fence was too gaudy and had to be removed was not just a rejection, it was a personal insult to individuality and a challenge to autonomy. Instead of treating it as the end of the road, the homeowner reframed the situation, asked what leverage could be gained, and ultimately transformed the setback into a position of strength by purchasing the road. Educationally, this moment demonstrates the power of perspective. When confronted with a setback, the instinctive response is often to dwell on what was lost or to submit to imposed limitations. Yet setbacks can be reframed as signals pointing toward alternative solutions. For example, being denied an opportunity may force you to seek one that is better aligned with your skills and values. Rejection in one area might push you to discover talents or strategies that otherwise would have remained hidden. The key lies in asking, what can I do with this situation that puts me in a stronger position than I was before? That question shifts the focus from loss to possibility. Turning a setback into a power move also involves developing resilience, which is the ability to recover quickly and adapt. Resilience is not about pretending setbacks don't hurt. It is about refusing to let them define the outcome. In the story, the initial conflict with the HOA could have ended in quiet compliance, with the homeowner simply repainting the fence to fit their rules. Instead, resilience fueled the search for an alternative that ultimately changed the balance of power. This highlights that setbacks are often temporary. How you respond to them determines whether they remain defeats or evolve into victories. Another educational lesson in this example is the importance of resourcefulness. When circumstances close one path, resourcefulness finds another. The homeowner discovered the option of purchasing the road, which most people would not have thought to explore.
Resourcefulness often requires looking beyond the obvious, conducting research, and considering unconventional approaches. It may also involve connecting with others, asking questions, or seeking advice to uncover opportunities that are not immediately visible. This process not only resolves the setback, but often reveals solutions with longer-lasting impact than the original plan. Furthermore, setbacks provide valuable opportunities to build credibility and authority. People who respond creatively and assertively to obstacles often earn respect from others. Instead of being remembered as someone who gave in, they become recognized as someone who stood firm and innovated under pressure. In leadership, business, and personal life, this ability to turn difficulties into achievements can inspire others and create influence far beyond the initial situation. The homeowner's bold move with the road not only resolved the fence conflict, it sent a message about independence and determination, reinforcing the principle that setbacks can fuel stronger outcomes than compliance ever could. The educational takeaway is that setbacks are inevitable, but defeat is not. Every challenge carries within it the potential for a power move, provided the individual has the mindset to see beyond immediate frustrations. This requires resilience to recover, creativity to reframe the problem, and resourcefulness to identify new strategies. Setbacks should not be feared. They should be embraced as tests of adaptability and imagination. By adopting this mindset, individuals can turn obstacles into stepping stones toward greater freedom, authority, and fulfillment. Just as the homeowner turned an HOA dispute into an act of empowerment, anyone can choose to take setbacks as opportunities to push back, stand tall, and come out stronger than before.
The bigger lesson that emerges from the conflict with the HOA is that it was never just about a fence or even the road that was eventually purchased. These objects are symbols, standing in for deeper ideas about freedom, creativity, and independence. On the surface, the fight might look like a trivial disagreement over aesthetics, but underneath, it raises critical questions about how much control individuals should allow others to have over their personal lives, and how far one should go to defend authenticity. The fence became a test of whether individuality could coexist with conformity, and the road purchase became an act of reclaiming autonomy. The educational lesson here is that in every conflict, there are broader principles at play, and the way you respond can either reinforce or undermine your core values. When we step back, the bigger lesson is that protecting creativity and independence requires courage. It is not always easy to stand out or to reject rules that others accept without question. Human beings naturally seek belonging, and conformity offers safety in numbers. But history shows that progress, innovation, and culture itself have always been advanced by those willing to defy convention. Just as artists, inventors, and pioneers often faced criticism before being celebrated, individuals in everyday life face choices between blending in or standing firm. In this context, the Gaudy fence is no longer just decoration. It represents the willingness to express individuality in the face of opposition. The road purchase is no longer just a transaction. It demonstrates that independence can be defended through strategic action. Educationally, this teaches the importance of principle-based decision-making. People often focus only on immediate outcomes, such as avoiding fines or keeping peace with neighbors. While there is value in compromise, sacrificing one's principles too often leads to a slow erosion of identity. The homeowner could have chosen the easy path by repainting the fence, but doing so would have sent the message that conformity wins, even at the expense of creativity. Instead, by taking a stand, the outcome reinforced a larger truth. Living authentically requires effort and sometimes conflict, but it is worth the struggle. This lesson applies broadly, from personal relationships to workplaces to society at large. If you do not defend your independence, you risk living by someone else's standards rather than your own.
Another key dimension of the bigger lesson is that systems of control often appear more powerful than they really are. HOAs, corporations, and institutions project authority, but their power often depends on people not questioning their rules. The moment someone investigates deeper, they may discover gaps, contradictions, or opportunities that shift the balance. The homeowner's decision to purchase the road was symbolic of this larger principle. It showed that power structures are not immovable. They can be challenged when individuals understand their rights and act decisively. The educational takeaway is that independence is not handed down, it is claimed through knowledge, persistence, and courage. This broader perspective also connects to the concept of legacy. The way you handle conflicts shapes not only your immediate environment, but also the lessons others take from your story. Friends, family, and neighbors notice when someone refuses to compromise their principles. They may be inspired to reconsider their own compliance with arbitrary rules. In this way, defending creativity and independence has a ripple effect. It models resilience for others, particularly younger generations, who may be watching to see whether standing out is safe or dangerous. The fence and the road are physical, but the story lives on as an example of how to protect authenticity in a world that often pressures people to conform. Ultimately, the bigger lesson is that life will always present forces of conformity that attempt to limit freedom, whether in the form of rules, expectations, or cultural pressures. The question is not whether these forces exist, but how individuals will respond. By choosing to live authentically, defend creativity, and resist unnecessary oversight, people create lives of meaning rather than quiet compliance. The story teaches us that protecting individuality is not trivial, it is essential. And sometimes, defending your independence may mean going as far as buying the road itself, just to remind others that authenticity is non-negotiable.